We're going to go very informal, as if I know what formal even means. We're just going to talk between ourselves. I've shared with you about the group, the Elijah Board of World Religious Leaders. I've shared with you sort of the kind of atmosphere we try to cultivate. And we've just decided we would talk amongst ourselves, really about ourselves, our relationships, and to share them more broadly. Let me introduce our friends and our panelists. Bishop Frank Griswold is former presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, which I'm sure all of you know is the U.S. version of the Anglican Church here. I know Frank before he was presiding bishop. He actually came to Jerusalem back in... No, it wasn't that early. I wasn't born yet. I think 1998 you were on a visit there. And he came and visited the Elijah School, and then at the time he was bishop in Chicago, and then when he was bumped up, we got bumped up with him. So it was a great joy to have him on board and to collaborate with him over the years. Next to him is Sister Maureen Goodman, who's representing the Brahma Kumaris, who are already very beautifully represented here among the audience. Maureen has been with us since Barcelona 2004, when Dadi Janki, who is one of the three heads of the Brahma Kumaris, and I believe just recently celebrated her 100th birthday, right? Yeah, in January. And I did get that birthday message to you, didn't I? I think I did. I sure hope I did, yeah. Joined the board of World Religious Leaders, but very often people can't attend, and Maureen has been a faithful representative and friend representing the Brahma Kumari movement. And to my left is Imam Professor Muhammad Suhail Umar from Pakistan, from Lahore. He heads the Iqbal Institute and is a foremost thinker of Muslim theology, Muslim mysticism, both a scholar and a religious leader, you know, just like we like them. And we'll talk, what we decided we would do was share with you what about our Elijah experiences is particular, how it moves us. And is it okay with you if I start? Because that way I can at least set something of a tone that you can follow. I want to tell each one of you a story and touch base with you on what you guys mean to me, and just finding a moment that shows some deep contact and appreciation and understanding. I'll start with you, Suhail, because you're right next to me. One of the things we need to do in interfaith is think about how our own tradition relates to other traditions. Technically, this is called theology of religions. In other words, how each tradition relates to the other. Many of you must have heard about the Second Vatican Council's Nostra Aetate document. Sign up. Nostra Aetate document, in which the Catholic Church redid its thinking towards other faith traditions. And all our traditions need to do that. So as we've moved on over the years with interfaith work, we've also moved forward with theology of religions work, asking how each tradition needs to redo its theology. So I launched a project of Jewish theology of religions, which has had some publications since, and I've launched a project of Muslim theology of religions. And together with Muslim scholars, I was able, and a Muslim figurehead scholars who invited others, I was able to convene a group of about maybe 20 Muslim thinkers and scholars. We met in Ifran in Morocco in 2007, for this Muslim Theology of World Religions project. I shared with you my theory that crises are opportunities. Well, we had a crisis. We had a leadership crisis in that project, and just the kind of thing that goes wrong when human beings are involved in projects. And the person who headed up the Muslim project decided to withdraw. But I was signed on the application to the foundations, and there was an important project, and people were committed to it. So I found myself suddenly moderating a group of about 20 Muslim theologians in trying to think through how Muslims can do their theology of world religions, and trying to get the project back on its feet, but with a Jew, rabbi, Israeli, working with a group of Muslim scholars to think about an internal Muslim project. One of the people who was very, very central at that point was Suhail, who agreed to take on the leadership of the project. Eventually things turned in a different way and the project didn't move forward, but not through lack of will. But what I'm wanting to highlight here is how much interfaith relations involve trust. It would have been impossible to conceive of an Israeli Jewish rabbi convening a group of Muslim scholars from across the world if there had not been deep trust. That I'm not, in fact, there was one of the members of our group, from Turkey, you'll remember him, who was suspicious. What's this Israeli doing here? And yet, the overwhelming majority of people were willing to go along with me, and one of those people who was able to rise above national political differences and to look to the core of the religions. And in the same way, Suhail and I share this thing, I'm sure, God first, religion as an outcome of it, right? So, and it's that allows us to work together and to collaborate and to share because it's God first. So, Suhail, I just want to say thank you to you for that deep level of trust and friendship that has been part of what's emerged in our relationship. Maureen, I want to say thank you to you in a slightly different way. In the fact that you totally get it and you're the right person at the right time, like a divine calling. And therefore, what you manifest for me, if Suhail manifests trust, you manifest friendship. The most recent, I told you I had a birthday recently? Yeah, I told you, right? Yeah. So anyway, this was just last week. This event occurred in my life that I turned 60. And we were traveling, and I travel, it's Shabbat. I take along a bottle of wine or grape juice to make kiddush, and I take a little kiddush cup for the rituals. And lo and behold, I forgot it. So we arrived last week, and we don't have a kiddush cup. Come Sunday, Maureen brings me a present from Daddy Junkie, a kiddush cup for my 60th birthday that she knew about. And I look at it and say, oh wow, look how God uses all the pieces to move, but it wasn't coming from nowhere. It followed her message to me on my birthday, which was so full of the wisdom of giving thanks for life and looking back in appreciation. So she wrote me this birthday wish, and I said, no, Maureen, I don't look backwards. I always look forwards. And then she came back to me after the talk before, and she said, you look how beautifully you look back on your life. What a beautiful and blessed life you've had. So Maureen has been a friend who's always been able to be a mirror of how to see the reality that I'm seeing when I'm rushed and busy and trying to get my projects done, and taking that moment to reflect and to appreciate. And that's really part of her calling, because part of what she brings into the world is something called the moment of silence, where it's a Brahma Kumari thing, but Maureen has really signed on it internationally. Stop and just take a moment of silence. Get your perspective. Look at it. And she's done that for me in our friendship. Even this little story. Stop. Don't just run ahead to the next 60 years. Reflect. Give thanks for it. So Maureen is one person who knows how to be a friend. And she really represents for me the gift of friendship, a God-given friendship that knows how to position itself at the right moment at the right time. Thank you. Frank, I want to say thank you to you for your deep understanding of the role of prayer in my life and spiritual work. It's because you're Christian, because you're a bishop, but also because you're a friend. And I remember walking the streets of New York with you in 2003. We were just before, you were already presiding bishop. I think you came into greatness in 2000, right? Yeah, and thank God you came into real greatness when you retired. And we were walking the streets. I think we just visited in your office, and you went somewhere, and you turned to me and said, Alon, you must have had so much prayer that goes into being able to sustain you in the work you're doing. I don't know if you remember that statement, but if you don't, I know you can recognize your own voice in it. You must have put so much prayer into it. And that was such a deep and encouraging moment, not just of friendship, but of recognition of the spiritual foundations of it and how to do the kind of work that all of us are engaged in, we can't do it without prayer. And your words on a cold New York street of the affirmation of the power of prayer to keep our mission in focus have remained with me. And I want to say thank you for that particular gift. And with that, I'm going to move the mic down, and let's all of us do a round and see where we are.
Thank you, Alon. There is a verse in the Quran which speaks about a very profound thing about what Alon has been talking. And it's like this. لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَلَكِنْ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ فِي مَا آتَاكُمْ فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. For every one of you, we have appointed a path and a law. And if God had willed, He could have made you one community, but He has willed otherwise, that you may, what He just said, holy envy, that you try to vie with each other in good works. This is something which speaks about that humanity, for thousands of years, humanity has been living in geographic expanse and ethnic diversity. And one same message of the one truth without refraction would not have been possible. But this verse, for an average Muslim, almost remains a dead letter. And I remember my master saying very vividly, which Alon also referred to, that an average Muslim sacrifices the glory of God 100 times to the glory of religion every day. So God is not in the center, religion is in the center. I came from an Islamic background, Sufi Islamic background, but more or less this very basic Quranic message was also in a kind of a dormant state in me. And there is a short story before my Elijah story. I was studying English literature, continental philosophy, empiricism, whatever is available in the Indian subcontinent in the name of philosophy. And it's usually British empiricism, which we call philosophy, and what it brings, the laws of transcendence or whatever. And a friend asked me that you have a library card, can you get a book of a certain author for me? And he named the author René Guénon, the French metaphysician. I got the book, gave it to him, and when he returned, he said, you must also read this book. And the book was Introduction to the Study of Hindu Doctrines, one of the seminal works of René Guénon. And it opened the door for me to understand what Quran was saying to me always, that there is one truth which is being refracted into different messages suitable to different receptacles of humanity. So the process started and blossomed. And I was with different interfaith initiatives. And then I was introduced to Elijah. And the moment came of Marrakesh, where we were invited, Muslim scholars, people from the academia, religious scholars, religious leaders, theologians, Sufis, to think about a very important thing which faces modern Muslims and other religious communities in the modern world. With the background of that Quranic perspective of inclusiveness, there was a further ramification of the question that in an age which we call post-prophetic age, we should think about the question in multicultural terms and theologically approach it by putting the question to ourselves that is there a difference between the status of the religious other in the post-prophetic age? He invited us to sit together and think about it, that do we need a reformulation of our theological positions vis-a-vis the religious other in a post-prophetic age. When a prophet or messenger of God is amidst a society, it's a very different situation. Those who face a divine messenger are in a very different situation. But once this moment passes away in history, is there a leveling out? How do we think and where do we place the religious other in terms of salvation, in terms of human rights, in terms of every kind of attitude we have to show towards the religious other? And that was a very challenging thing. And as he said, he was leading us to discuss this issue among ourselves. And we did that. We trusted him and he guided us. But the basic vision of Elijah was working behind it. That is, to understand the other, enhance yourself. And that's what we did. Many things came out of it, though the project, as he said, could not come to fruition yet in the manner he had visualized it. But it had many byproducts and far-reaching effects, which I mentioned the other day, that we felt this very year, 2016. A book came out of that project, or of that meeting, which had the title, The Religious Other, Towards a Muslim Theology of the Religious Other in a Post-Prophetic Age. And it had an article, I asked several friends to contribute to it, which interpreted which looked at the problem of interpreting inclusivist verses of the Quran in an exclusivist manner, which is a problem in every tradition, that your scripture, the very inclusivist approach or verses are being interpreted in a very exclusivist manner. So that article that was written in 2007 reappeared in a volume which accompanied a fresh translation of the Quran in English with a summary of all the classical commentaries, Quran commentaries attached to it. And there was some debate on it, but that was the same article which has originated from Marrakesh event in 2007. So what we started and he guided had not pettered out, as he think the project could not be completed in the manner he wanted to, but it had very fruitful outcomes. And this was a witness to what I just said, that this process of opening yourself to the other, understanding the other, reaching out to the other, brings about necessarily a change in your own perspective, on looking at your own things, and it enhances yourself. That is I think, the most cherished thing about my relationship with Elijah.
Thank you. Thank you. I was thinking today when, Alon, you mentioned the bug, the bug of interfaith. And I've often thought of it like that. And I remember catching the bug a very long time ago, in 1978, in fact, in Glasgow, of all places. And walking into this gathering, and I didn't really know what it was about. The door was opened, and there was a scene of people in their different robes, standing together, talking together. And I just thought I was in heaven. It really, really touched me. So it really was like catching a bug. And I'm glad I caught it, because I think over the years, having interacted with people of many, many different faiths, it's definitely enabled me to be much more broad-minded and much more able to, in a way, be an instrument, or to in a humble way, work in the way that I think God is wanting of me, but to do that in a way that is much more inclusive. I've had beautiful experiences with all the people sitting here, but I was remembering one thing about being with Elijah that was when I first started to come about 10 years or more ago to the meetings. I don't think I'd been in a meeting with so many scholars before, actually. And I have to admit that at first I was a bit lost with some of it. I was very touched by the kindness of everyone, by the sincerity of everyone. And when you speak about trust, trust is based on the sincerity in the heart. And definitely for you, Alon, but all the people I've encountered, that has touched me very deeply and made me feel very at home, very at ease, knowing that I can share, knowing that I can learn, knowing that I can listen, and not think about what I should or shouldn't be doing. I don't have to think about that. I can just be, and I can enjoy, and that's the way you absorb so much more. The atmosphere created at the Elijah meetings are very, it's a spiritual atmosphere. And one particular experience, it was when we visited, it was 2 years ago when we went to Germany near Munich, and we visited the Dachau concentration camp. And it's the second time I've visited a concentration camp. Very dark places. But then right next door to it was a Carmelite, a convent. And again, it was like stepping from hell into heaven, literally. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different. And those nuns had been there from just after the war, I believe. They had established this convent very specifically to pray for those souls who had been there in the camp and for the souls who had suffered. And that touched me very deeply. And I know that in the Brahma Kumaris, we want to bring God's energy into ourselves, connect with God, spread out God's energy to the world. It's a practice that we do in meditation. And I just felt that same energy that was working so deeply through those, the nuns, and the gentleness and the hospitality. You know, the contrast couldn't have been greater. It touched me very much. And so I was, you know, on the one hand, the scholars, the leaders. I have to admit, some religious leaders I've met, not in Elijah actually, in other contexts, can be a little bit arrogant. But I haven't met such leaders in Elijah. And they bring a spiritual presence. The scholars and the leaders bring a spiritual presence, which is very special. And Daddy Janki, who's been mentioned, has always encouraged me in interfaith work. And when we brought religious leaders together at our retreat centre a few years ago, after she'd met them, I just went to her room and I just asked her, Daddy, what do you think about this gathering? And she just paused. It was just her and me in the room. And she said, this is a gathering to learn a lot from. And that really touched me. That spirit of learning is so important. And something she said I'd also like to quote from one of her writings. She said, God wouldn't give us power to fight one another. God would give us power to bring peace. True religion means peace. And I remember the first time I met Suhail was in Kathmandu. Do you remember when it was the Sufi Yogi Dialogue that was organized by another organization, the Global Peace Initiative of Women? And I hadn't been so exposed to Sufism before. And again, very spiritual gathering. And I was very touched by although you're a scholar, but the way you talked about your spiritual experiences and described your own internal research, that touched me very deeply. It was not academic. It was real. And not that academia isn't real, but I think you know what I mean. It wasn't of the head, it was of the heart. And I got to know a lot more about Sufism. It's these moments that touch you and you realize how God is working. And we think there are many religions that are like a variety tree, but God is the seed. And that seed is nourishing the whole tree. Frank, I've just got to know you. Were at our retreat centre, but we never really got to know each other. But now we've got to know each other a little bit, and I love your presence and I love your smile. And you know when you smile, your eyes smile, your whole being smiles. And that tells me you're a really beautiful spiritual person, and I hope we get to know each other a lot more, and I'm sure we will. And so, yes, I've been grateful for the very deep, enriching friendships that I've experienced through all my experiences in interreligious work. Pass over the mic now.
Thank you. Thank you. Maureen, you mentioned the level of the heart, and I think that is, for me, the deepest gift that the Elijah Institute has given me over the years is that, well, I'll back up. I've participated in many, many discussions involving people of other faiths, and we usually function at the level of the mind. And there's usually something that we can raise up as a topic that will provoke a variety of quite different responses. I mean, we might say, what is your view of the doctrine of the Trinity? Well, you can imagine what happens if you begin with something like that. So I think one of the wise things that happens with Elijah is you begin with something that's universal, such as wisdom. We all have understandings of wisdom. And so you recognize a topic that immediately draws you in and invites you to explore it out of your own faith tradition, but usually in a way that builds rather than challenges in some negative fashion. I think, too, this depth that I've experienced in the meetings of the Elijah Institute has a great deal to do with the fact that all of us have a contemplative tradition. It may be practiced or realized in different ways. There may be different ways of describing it. But I think essentially it's an experience of deepening that integrates the different dimensions of ourselves in such a way that we experience an interior freedom, and that freedom gives us, what would I say, a willingness in an undefended way to move toward the other in a positive relationship. The defensiveness that sometimes has to occur if you're living at a dogmatic level can be set aside when you meet at the level of the heart and out of the depth of your own tradition of prayer and spirituality. And for me, one of the most startling and wonderful moments was when we were in Spain for a meeting of the Elijah Institute. And curiously, I think God has a wonderful way of surprising us at odd moments, and things happen in contexts that you didn't expect them to happen in. So this was a tea break after a session, and I was standing with a teacup trying to see if someone had taken all the sugar or not. And there was a Dharma master from Taiwan standing beside me. He didn't speak English. I didn't speak Chinese. One of the nuns of his community was able to sort of interpret. And somehow we began to speak. And we spoke, as I remember it, about contemplative experience out of our traditions. And as we spoke, I had the sense of sparks sort of flying through the air. I mean, we became more and more animated because I think we were recognizing in one another the same reality, the same reality. And this poor nun had to, move very quickly because we were speaking very rapidly and in a very engaged way. And I thought, isn't this a wonderful way in which God has surprised us? You just never know when suddenly God is going to say, I just want you to realize that at your heart you are brothers. In a profound way, you're bound together in my spirit, you're bound together in my love. And I think Elijah, by moving everything to that sort of deep interior level, while of course paying attention to how does it serve the world, how does it transform a world in which peace is so singularly absent, though we have our external view, obviously it comes from that inner place, and the valuing of that has been so important to me, as has been the fact that I think most of us participate in the life of Elijah because of the very genuine friendship we feel with Alon. His care for us, his sudden telephone calls out of nowhere, these little encouraging emails that come, so that when he insists, though you have bronchitis, that you get on a plane and come to a meeting, it's very hard to say no, and you show up. So there's a friendship with a hook for which I'm very grateful on many occasions. So it's a gift to be part of this enterprise, and it's a gift to have brothers and sisters of such deep faith and such generous spirits.
I want to add a little supplement to your story, but not before, first of all, highlighting some of the themes we've had here. So we've had trust, friendship, prayer, humility, heart. I think these have been the main themes so far, right? And I want to raise one more theme, which is learning, because we take it so much for granted that none of us bother talking about it. You're remembering only part of the story. I was there when you had that story, and I'd like to remind you of another part of it, because I think it's crucial to Elijah, and actually it yielded further activity. The year is 2003. We are in Spain. That day we visited Cordoba. We were touring through Cordoba. We saw the synagogue of Maimonides. We studied Cordoba as a model of Jewish, Christian, Muslim coexistence. Then we went to some institute that I no longer remember what it was, and we studied together. You were in the study group with Dharma Master. I remember this because I believe I was moderating that group, so I watched it. And we were studying texts together. Some texts on the mystical life. I don't remember what it was. And Frank was just so excited at the possibility to study certain texts across traditions. And it was that moment of study, and he said, we must make this study a regular thing and sort of institutionalize the kind of study that happens here. And then it continued over the tea break, and because the conversation was one-on-one, that was the part that you recalled. I took away from that the need to create a framework for people to not just talk mysticism or be humble or whatever, but really study and engage the resources. And that then led to the creation of one particular branch of Elijah that you've taken part in, and you've been invited to, but your schedule didn't allow you, which was the Forum for the Study of Mystical and Spiritual Life. And I remember very clearly when I started on that, I always harked back to that story of you and Dharma Master and the power of shared study. And therefore our testimony would not be complete if I didn't remind us of the power that while we come together with all these wonderful things, we do study together, and we study each other's texts and traditions and wisdom. And we're here talking about a global peace agenda. Our motto is sharing wisdom, fostering peace. And if there's anything we can say that contributes to peace, it's the power of sharing wisdom that contributes to that.